everybody, I'm Natalia Bonner. All right, you know I have my brand new Sway machine quilting rulers, and I've been having a lot of fun machine quilting with them. So today we're going to be quilting out a feather border design. I'm going to be quilting this design on a 6-inch border, and the ruler that I'm going to choose to use is the Sway 4 machine quilting ruler. So today I'm going to walk you through my process of using the Sway machine quilting ruler to mark out your design and then quilt the spine, and then we'll quilt some really fun feathers. I'm going to be doing all of my quilting here on my Gamble 22-inch machine. I am quilting here using So Fine color number 510 on the top, and then on my bobbin I have bottom line color number 624. That just happens to be my favorite thread combination. So Fine on top and bottom line in my bobbin. I will be using the blue Mark Be Gone marker here to mark out my marked lines. I've had really great success with the Mark Be Gone, so that's what I'm going to choose to use. But whenever you're using the Mark Be Gone marker, make sure that your markings are 100% removed from your quilt top before you apply any heat at all. I like to use our Peace and Quilt misting spray bottles to mist away my marked lines. Let's hop over to my machine and let's start marking. To quilt out this fun border design, first we're going to do a bit of marking. Here I've marked out on my solid fabrics a 6-inch border. I chose a 6-inch border just because it sounded fun and I wanted to quilt on that side. So that's what this defined space right here is, a 6-inch border. Now, anytime you want to quilt a border feather design with our new Sway machine quilting rulers, you will need to do a bit of marking. The first thing that I'm going to do is use my blue Mark Be Gone marker and a straight ruler. Through my corner, I'm going to mark that mitered corner, a 45-degree angle right through the center. Now, if this were on a full quilt, I would mark this in all 4 corners before I load my quilt on my long arm machine. Next thing that I'm going to do is mark a straight line right through the center of this defined space. So right at the 3-inch marking, I'm going to mark a straight line all the way through that border. Now that we have our marking complete, we're going to do a little more marking. So first we're going to audition rulers. I like to pull out all of my Sway machine quilting rulers, the Sway 5, the Sway 4, and the Sway 3, and I'll start out by laying those on there and determining what I think will fit best for this space. This is a 6-inch space, so I'll lay my Sway ruler on here, and I can see that this is probably going to be maybe a little bit too big, or maybe exactly what I want for this space. Something cool on the Sway machine quilting rulers. Through the large circle on the end of each of the Sway rulers, you're going to find a straight line that's marked through that is at the exact same height as this little straight edge over on this end. So through there, there's a marked line. On this Sway 3, you're going to find the same thing, that marked line. It's not through the center of the circle, it's a little bit above. That straight line there, straight line over here. Same thing on the Sway 4. The straight line marked through here and that straight line. Why do I tell you about those straight lines? A fun feature when I designed these Sway machine quilting rulers, I designed them so that if you line this straight line and this straight line up over here, you can quilt around this curve and then along this curve, and you're going to end up with a curve that's the exact same distance from this marked point to my stitch line here, and from this marked line to my stitch line here. So that's going to help me when I'm auditioning my rulers. You can see here when I'm laying the Sway 4 machine quilting ruler, I'm going to quilt around the circle, but remember you always have to think about that extra 1/4 of an inch around, leaving enough space for your ruler foot. So I actually kind of like the size of the Sway 4 here. I feel like if my stitching comes right up about there, then I'm still going to have a decent inch, inch and a half to quilt this feather motif in there. With the Sway 5, if I chose to use that one, I'm just going to have a bit larger curve, longer curves as I stitch that out, but you'll see adding a 1/4 inch here, my space right here is going to be shrunk down probably to about an inch. Then with the Sway 3 machine quilting ruler, you can see again, if I line up, I'm going to stitch a 1/4 of an inch on the outside there. So now I'm going to have a pretty large space, maybe even closer to an 1 3/4 ish. I'm not measuring here, but about that. So use all of your Sway machine quilting rulers and determine how big you want your curve. You know, if your quilt is a particular size, you may want to do larger or smaller, just depending on what you want to achieve. Let's use the Sway 4 machine quilting ruler here. The first thing that I'm going to do is mark my corner. To mark my corner on the Sway 4 machine quilting ruler, on this end here, this end of the Sway 4, all of the Sway machine quilting rulers is designed to mark that perfect 4-inch circle. So here is the circle. Through the center of the circle, there's a straight line right here. There's a straight line right here. They intersect right at the center of that circle. You'll also notice there's this 45-degree marked line that goes right through the center of that circle. So when I'm marking out this first 4-inch curve, I'm lining up this straight line right here on top of my marked line and this 45-degree angle that's on my ruler right on top of the line that I've marked on my border. Now I am going to start out and I'm actually going to mark this corner right here. I'm choosing to mark it just to give me reference as I'm quilting my way through this quilt. It's a nice guide. I'll know exactly where I need to line things up as I'm quilting. I know how big it's going to appear. So let's quilt or mark that out. You'll see how I marked my first curve, then I flipped my ruler and again lined that 45-degree marking on the Sway 4 machine quilting ruler right on top of that marked line. I'm going to flip the ruler one more time and mark again the remainder of that curve. So now that I've marked over here, this curved marking on the Sway 4 will line up on top of my previous marked line. I'm also lining up that 45-degree line. Now I'm going to continue marking that curve. So now that I have this corner circle marked out, I am going to mark a few more lines. So using my Sway 4 machine quilting ruler, I'm going to line it up so that this center line through my center of the Sway 4 circle intersects right on that point. At this point, I'm going to mark a little increment there and a small increment here on the other side. I am marking those just to give me reference points where to hold my ruler as I'm quilting. Yes, I'm going to hold it here. I can see all these reference lines, so this may seem like a little bit of overkill on the markings, but let me show you why. Once I quilt around this circle, I am going to advance my ruler to quilt my next swag. The way I've designed the Sway 4, the Sway 3, and the Sway 5 machine quilting rulers, you'll next want to line up your ruler so you'll stitch on this line. Then from there, I'm going to hold my ruler right on that marked line so that my continuous stitching line will be 1/4 of an inch on the inside of this curve on the Sway 4. The next thing I will do is make a small marking right there at the top of the curve where the sway 4 intersects my straight line. Now that I have that marking marked, I will advance my ruler again and I'll repeat that process. So I'll line up this side of my ruler on my marked line, and then I'm going to mark a small increment right there where that flat part on the sway 4 intersects my marked line. I'll repeat that process. Advance my ruler, mark that small increment. Now you don't have to mark out all of this, but I think overall you're going to end up with quite a bit better result if you do have those reference points marked ahead of time. So I'll also repeat that process over here going down the left side. Again, if this were a full border going around an actual quilt, not just a fun play sample, I would also use the same process. So I'm back here lining up my ruler and then marking these marked points right here, and I would advance down my quilt. Let's get stitching. Before we do begin stitching, there are a few materials that you will need before you do any ruler quilting. Obviously, we've already used the blue Mark Be Gone marking. After my quilting is all complete, I'm going to use our Piece and Quilt misting spray bottle to mist away those marked lines. Obviously, I'm going to be using the Sway 4 machine quilting ruler. Anytime you're doing ruler work, make sure you're using machine quilting rulers. These rulers are thicker, they're 1/4 of an inch thick, and they're designed so that the ruler foot here on my Gamble quilting machine or the machine you're working on will glide right next to that foot. If you use a rotary type ruler, chances are your ruler is going to slide under your hopping foot and you're going to break your ruler and you're going to be a really sad quilter. The next essential tools are a ruler foot. So here I have the Gamble ruler foot on my Gamble quilting machine. You can pick these up from your machine dealer depending on what type of machine that you have. Standard ruler feet are designed so that from your needle position to the outside of the ruler foot is a 1/4 of an inch all the way around. It's also a nice thick foot. Here on my machine, you can also see this nice, wide, thick base plate. This is my Gamble extended base plate. Again, this is a tool you will pick up from your machine dealer. This is an essential tool when using machine quilting rulers. Often when I'm quilting, I'm holding my hand here on my ruler and using gentle pressure to gently glide my ruler or my machine against the side of my ruler. Because I have this extended base plate here on my machine, it gives me a nice flat working surface. So even if you're working on a sit down type machine, you need to make sure you have a large flat working surface. Because I do all of my quilting on a long arm quilting machine, I like to work across my quilts from left to right. So here you're viewing this as if you're standing behind my machine. This is the left side of my quilt. The marked dot that I had marked, I am going to position my foot here so that my needle is a 1/4 of an inch away from that marked spot. How do I know it's exactly a 1/4 of an inch? I simply move my machine so that my ruler foot is right next to that dot. Right there on top of my marked line is where I'm going to take my first stitch. I'm starting on the left side as far down as my throat space will allow. So at that point, I will take one stitch. Right now I have my needle in the down position so everything is held securely. I'm going to use my Sway 4 machine quilting ruler, line this middle marked line right on top of my marked line through the center of my border, and then over here on this end the straight line is lined up right against the side of that marked line. But remember that little increment we marked, it's also lined up right with that increment. So the first thing we're going to do is stitch out the spine. So I've quilted my first curve. Now I'm at my corner and I'm going to line up my Sway 4 machine quilting ruler and quilt around that marked circle. Anytime I need to stop and reposition my ruler, I always stop with my needle in the down position. So we have our first corner here, but let's continue on. And this is where the fun of the Sway machine quilting rulers really starts to come to life. So again, I'm lining up this marked line, the middle marked line on the curve or circle end of the Sway 4, this straight line over here. I'm going to stitch my next curve. So when I approach my line right here through the center, again, I'll stop with my needle in the down position, reposition my ruler, and then I'm going to stitch this time 2 curves. I'll stitch again to my center line, stop with my needle in the down position, adjust my ruler, and continue stitching. Now, because this is not a full border, it's going to actually just kind of be a partial border here. I am going to continue stitching just a quarter curve around the end of my ruler just to create a little bit more interest. I am going to adjust my ruler so that it's about a 1/2 inch above my marked line. So my center point here is about a 1/2 inch above. I'll stitch around my curve right up to the center point. Now at that point I'm going to stop and I am going to quilt 1 feather. Just a simple teardrop. I like to quilt my feathers as if they're going clockwise around my quilt. So at this point, I'm going to stop, cut my threads, and move back over to the left side of my quilt. I'll start as far down as my throat space will allow, and I'll quilt first across the bottom side here, and then second across that top side. For this feather, we're going to keep it a little bit simple with a playful feather. I start out with 1 teardrop feather, and then from there, I'll repeat that shape, building upon it, filling in the concave and convex sides of my curve. You'll notice as I get to my corner that I am going to use that marked line and make my feather wrap around the corner. So by using that marked line as a reference point, I'll stitch the feathers right up to that. When I get to the top of my circle, then I'll just wrap right around and continue on. You can try any type of feather you would like, bump back, more playful, anything like that. Really here we're using the Sway machine quilting rulers to create a beautiful spine and then just adding beautiful designs to the outside of the spine. When I quilt out these playful feathers, I'm not worried about perfection in my spacing. You'll notice that sometimes there's little spaces between my feathers. I think these are a great place to start. Start out by just practicing one side of your feather. Master that side of your feather, and then work on the second side. The more you repeat the design, the more you quilt it out, the more efficient you'll become, and the more comfortable you'll become with machine quilting. As I reach the end where I've created that little wrap around, I'm going to quilt right around that. So this type of feather is a great feather to quilt out, maybe in all 4 corners of your border or even in just 2 of your corners, meeting in the center. Once I completed that first side, I chose to stop, cut my threads, and now I'll go clear back to the left side where I originally started quilting, and now I'll complete that second side. You could, however, if you wanted, stitch along your spine, again using the Sway 4 machine quilting ruler to stitch all the way back to where you started. You all know I don't believe in rules, so do what works best for you. I love how this feather turned out. It's so beautiful and fills in that 6-inch border. Awesome. You can pick up our brand new Sway machine quilting rulers over on our website, peaceandquilt.com. Have a great day, everybody.